Whoa, whoa, whoa. We got one for you today. We are talking about women in ministry. Hey, if you don't know the issue that's going on with the stuff that's with women being in ministry and church, check it out. Listen in. It's going to be a good one.
Thank you for tuning in. We are Tristin and Michael, and you are listening to Fused, transparent conversations for marriage, family, and relationships. We invite you to join us as we discuss topics that are thought about but not talked about. So tell your friends and family to check us out. And of course, join us on all our socials as well as our website, fusedmarriages.com, for more content and resources.
Hey, what's going on? You like, hey, I get, hey, little dainty. No, you not. You don't. But you might, some days you are. Let me phrase that. You are dainty some days.
Felt like it was going in a direction I wasn't.
You not
I
like,
can be, well, I mean, it's not my, well,
yeah, it's not your go-to.
Right.
It's not your go-to.
I'm not dainty.
You can be it, but you're not necessarily your go-to.
I try sometimes.
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that.
Gotta be me. I gotta be myself.
You know, you got the multi-dimensional is what I'm hearing.
Come on, you better fix it.
I'm talking about. I'm not fixing. I'm just telling you what it is. You are multi-dimensional.
Hey, I'm gonna take it.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Good stuff.
Well, we're diving into a conversation. I want to let you kind of introduce what we're discussing today because I'm curious how this is going to go.
I think it's going to go very well. I think it's going to be very engaging, entertaining, interesting, hopefully informative. Mm-hmm. But today we're gonna try to at least spend a little bit of time, and may run out of time, but we'll at least try to spend as much time as we can with understanding, right, the role of women in the church, and we're tying it home with that, right, as well. But the role of women in the church, it's been in some circles, it's a controversial discussion. Mm-hmm. So if you're not as familiar with, some of the issues and dynamics, you'll hear about it today. If you are familiar with it, we'll address some of them. Mm-hmm. Can't do all of them, right? But hopefully we can get some maybe better understanding. And I love your insight, right, on what that means and what all that goes to that.
Yes, and we definitely, on this conversation, I am particularly interested in hearing from you if you've had any experiences as either a woman in the church or a man that has observed a particular perspective in maybe your church or congregations that you visited. So this is certainly a dialogue that I'd love to hear various vantage points. So let's see.
Absolutely. So this is going to be a little bit different, y'all. If y'all have watched some of our other shows or heard of other shows, I'm going to be the one interviewing, or at least asking some questions, and we get the color commentator or the conversation will come from Miss Tristin here, and we'll kind of dialogue back and forth a little bit, right? Okay. Go from there. All right. So first question. Okay, Miss Tristin. Okay. Miss Tristin. What do you want to call Miss Raquel?
That's fine.
Okay, I'm just making sure. Okay. I'm trying to get my,
he does the most.
Oh my goodness. Anyway.
Your interview skills.
Yeah, my interview skills. Okay. Ed Gordon. Not Ed Gordon. Anyway, who's 60 Minutes guy, black guy? I think he's, anyway. Yeah, I probably know what I'm talking about, but I can't think of it right now. So the first question is, let's get serious real quick. Okay. First question, right? Is submission a hot button for some women? Is the word submission, the idea or the concept of submission, a hot button for some women?
Yes.
Please explain why.
I believe that submission has been used to force women to take abuse and mistreatment, and it has flown under that title, particularly in the church, so that women now feel that to stand up for themselves or to say no means that they're not being submissive and that they're not operating underneath what God would have them to do. And so it's really been a term that has been a blanket for misogyny and negative experiences for women in the church and in the home.
I guess I can agree with you from the standpoint I have seen and I have heard that some men had used the idea that, we're talking about, I'm trying to go back and find it, but it's in Ephesians 5:20-21, where it states that, hey, you know what, right? What kind of conversation? Wives submit to your husband, right? And I've seen and heard men kind of like, hey, you know what? You need to submit, right? With the idea that there's no ownership on them to do their part, right? Because to me, if I have daughters, I'm gonna ask, what are you submitting to, right? I'm just saying that's how if one of them were to get married or this, that, and the other, and if they think that way or he thinks that way, my question to them, what are you submitting to? Oftentimes that gets left out of the conversation. Why do you think that is?
Why do I think that? What are you submitting to gets left out?
The idea that the man he feels he has the confidence to say, you know what, hey, submit to what I have or with the way of things need to be done. And oftentimes the accountability part, right?
Yeah.
Of the man saying or anybody asking, hey, what are they submitting to, right? Or do you have a track record of somebody submitting to you and following you? That never. I'm trying to.
No, we really just jumped all the way into the deep end, and this is not everybody's experience, but for a lot of women, the this idea of submission, as I said, has been an abuse tactic, and part of why it has kind of become systematic in a lot of churches, not all churches, but in a lot of churches, is because all of these churches, maybe I shouldn't say all, but many of these churches, this kind of regulatory system is handed down patriarchally. So, or even from a misogynistic perspective. So it's men that are telling women, these are the things that you're supposed to do to make your husband happy and to make your church happy. And there's no balance in what does this look like? What does it really mean? Where does this come from? How is it actualized? And then, to your point, there is no accountability for how the man behaves in the home and for a lot of places in the church. And so it's just women being subject to whatever the man feels in any given time. And if she rebuts or if she disagrees, then she's labeled as a rebellious woman. And all of this is under the auspice of Christendom. And so what happens is that a lot of, they use that cloak of, well, this is what God would have you to do. And so women feel stuck, like, okay, God gave me this voice and he gave me this position, he gave me this perspective, and I'm feeling disrespected, but I have to take it because that's what God would have me to do, thus says my church. And so I think a lot of times it's a really convoluted conversation because you're trying to find the line of delineation between the man and the voice of God. And that has just it's become, not for everybody, but for a lot of women, just this kind of beat down system, depending on who they're quote unquote submitting to.
Man, that's very interesting. I'm gonna read just so we're not actually, we're not making up what, just kind of the conversation of what's being had here. So the controversial, at least I'm gonna say it's controversial. Maybe it needs more clarity. Let's put it that way. I don't want to call the Bible controversial. So I'm reading from Ephesians 5, verse 22. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husband as you do the Lord. Right? That's the one that, a lot of husbands maybe kind of throw out there whenever, something may not going that way or need to, trying to get somebody to do something. But often there's a verse right above that, right?
I was about to ask you about it. Go ahead.
I read it.
Okay,
I have no problem reading it. Submit one to another out of the reverence for Christ. Right? The idea of mutual submission. You mind talking about that a little bit? Just mutual submission.
I remember when I first started saying this years and years ago, and I was told by many pastors that wasn't biblical. And this idea of mutual respect and mutual submission under God, and even the idea of submitting unto your own spouse, unto your own husband, versus like somebody else that's regulating you or your body or your thoughts or whatever. It's just really interesting that there's so frequently in the church, it's just women. It's like men don't have to follow the same rules. Men are not obligated to submit to Christ. And then the problem with that is who says if they're submitted to Christ? Like, where's the accountability? So a man can say to a woman, you're not submitting to me, but who says to the man, you're not submitting to Christ? And because men are often disconnected in terms of living in community where somebody can call your stuff out, nobody really has the access and the ability to call out the man. And instead, too often, the church will just back the man and say, well, just pray for him. If you pray for your husband, he's going to get it right. And yet she has to live in a system of, of violence or volatile communication or disrespect or dishonor. But all of the scriptures that apply to that are really determined by the man who so frequently is backed by the church. I know it sounds kind of redundant, but that is the experience of a lot of women in the church, that you can't speak, you can't talk, you can't do, you can't go without the quote unquote permission. And I don't believe that that's how God really designed it. I do believe that there is mutual submission. I do believe that we honor one another and we care for one another because we recognize that God is the head. And if we dishonor one another, then we are not honoring the God that we say that we serve.
Wow, that's deep. That's deep. That's good. That's good. Hey, if y'all don't agree with some of this or you do agree, drop some comments, send us some email, whatever have you.
I'm curious.
Share your thoughts on it, right? Because a lot of we started in some circles, this is a controversial, and others it's not.
Yeah.
But if you don't know it is, sometimes you need just awareness and understanding. Some people are dealing with this, right? It's a real thing.
A lot of us.
Yeah. It's a
lot of us have.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I think when you proposed and we met my family, like you had met my family, but we ended up having dinner, I think it was the next day with some family. Yeah. And I remember one of my aunts, and you'll remember one of my aunts said to you, how did she say it? She's like, are you going to let Tristin...
Look at Tristin continue to pursue and whatever thing about it been acting or writing or...
Yeah, basically be who, my passions. And I remember you saying like, yeah. And later we talked about it and you said you didn't even really grasp the question, like, why wouldn't you? But based on my experience in Christianity and so many of my family and a lot of Black women in particular, is that sometimes you get married and this guy comes in and says, okay, now we're married. You're supposed to help me and you're supposed to, make me better. And it's now the tables are all about me versus we make each other better. We push each other towards higher heights and deeper depths. That it just became focused on him. And that happens so often, not just because like, oh, I love him, I want to help him, or I love her, I want to help her, but because that is the angle of what people think of as the wife's role is to help her husband achieve and to be, and he doesn't really have a responsibility to do the same for her. And so, that kind of goes into the submission concept is, hey, I submit to you, I do what you want me to do, and often submission becomes kind of the doormat, even though I don't think that that's the intention scripturally or by definition. But it does become this like, I push you forward, I do everything, and then you'll give me the scraps at some point. At some point, when you're fully established and you have everything that you want, then you'll turn to me and say, hey, what do you want? Maybe. And so I think that it's kind of interesting, even though that was your experience and she meant what she said. And I, at the time, knew exactly what she meant because I have seen it over and over and over. Really amazing women not have an opportunity because their spouse doesn't think about them. Wow. They only think about themselves.
Wow. Okay. Well, good. I appreciate you for sharing that. That's all true. That's very true. That did happen. We'll talk. Let's continue. Continue.
Okay.
All right. So we'll move on to the next question. Okay. And the next question is, can women be ministers and preachers? And let me frame it up just a little bit, right? Because for some people, they may be asking why you've been asking this question, right?
Okay.
But again, in some circles, religious circles, Christian circles, a lot of women don't even carry the title, right? A lot of women aren't even allowed to get at the main, we call them podiums, because in our cases, maybe stage where the head preacher speaks at, right? They got to. That's normal in
some circles.
In some circles. So that leads to the question of like, hey, why Or is it okay? Or should women be able to be called ministers and preachers?
Mm-hmm.
Please talk about that.
I think the answer is yes. I think you fulfill whatever God has called you to do, regardless of what people say. I think women can be preachers, pastors, speakers, evangelists, prophets, whatever God is putting you to do, that's what you do. And sadly, no matter what that thing is, there's going to be somebody that says that you shouldn't, couldn't, wouldn't. I mean, it literally, that could go for in or outside the church. It doesn't matter. There's always going to be somebody that is telling you why you can't do the thing that you are called to do. You know, if you're, I mean, I could really go through any number of examples. So my answer is yes. And I actually want to ask you a question on this, because though this is what I believe, I also have heard so many times people say of like, if you're a man that has like a woman pastor or woman leader, that you're not really a man, like you're weak or something. Like, what do you? I've heard this preached from pulpits. What do you think about that?
What do I think about it? Personally, I have not been, people may have thought it, maybe, right? Because just for the record, we know that you are a minister, right? And people may have thought it. They haven't never approached me with it in any kind of way that I picked up on. But to your point, some men may see like, oh, you know, your wife out here doing this, that, and the other, right? With far as leading or ministering, this, that, and the other, right? From my standpoint, I have to go up to the understanding. Okay, what is a minister? What is a preacher? That's someone that shares the good news, right? And who am I to say that God hasn't given you something to share? And are we gonna get hung up on a title and saying, well, you shouldn't be minister, you shouldn't be a preacher,
or gender,
or based? I'm sorry.
Get hung up on a gender, like the message is somehow diluted because it came in my voice versus
Right.
yours.
That's even a whole other discussion, right? Of should somebody, myself, will get caught up and prohibit, stop, get upset, be passive aggressive about it because God has given you something unique to share, right? If I had something unique to share, maybe I wouldn't be so up in arms about it versus getting on what God has given you. So my objection would say, for me, is say, okay, God, give me something unique to share. Why do I have to prohibit you from speaking what God has given to you? And I think for me, what I see, I think it takes a strong man to handle a strong woman, right? And a lot of men ain't built for it. It is not, right? They don't know how to handle it. They don't know it's an ego thing. They can't handle, you know what, she's speaking better than them, more than them, make more money, with all these other things that may end up really driving the psychology of it. Can I be a man if, you know what, somebody does something better than me? Right? And that may carry over beyond just their spouse. It probably goes outside of their circle too, right? With other men, they feel, you know, inferior if somebody makes more and they got a better car, got to find a wife, got kids nicer, whatever have you. Which, you know, a lot of men think like that. It makes it sound crazy, but a lot of men may think like that, right? And that's just carrying over to the home because I got to deal with you every day. I can leave, you know, work or leave a conversation. Somebody smarter than me, I can just walk away from it. But what if, you know, my wife got a little more intellect, a little more insight, you know, but she logos. I don't know what logos is, but she, you know, can I handle that? Right? And I got to be okay. To me, that's an insecurity thing that I believe a lot of men have. Right. Personally, it doesn't affect me one bit. Now, if a man wants to kind of talk to me about the whys and ins and outs of how I handle it, we can talk about that. But I've never been approached with that. But I will be completely fine with telling them basically what I told you, right? Just now, over the conversation, saying, "Hey, you know what, women, I feel, you know, they God can give them something to share. I have no problem calling a woman a minister or a pastor, from a biblical standpoint either. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
It's interesting because a lot of people will like, and they're, you know, it's a conversation piece, but when you start talking about like the gift of something versus the office of something, a lot of people will say like, oh, well, they have the gift or the ability to preach, but they should not live in the office of the pastor, which is like basically the title of I'm pastor of. And I find that really, I find it very silly because you start kind of thinking about the why from a biblical perspective, and then the why from like a practical hands and feet of Jesus perspective. And how is it that we are unable, based on our gender, to preach the good news? If I stand up, so if I am I standing on the floor and I'm preaching, then it's the gift. But if I stand on a platform and I'm preaching, and somebody says, "Go, pastor," then now I'm out of order, even if it's the same message. And or if I say, you know what, I'm gonna start a church and I'm going to do this homeless ministry, and anybody who's homeless can come and hear me minister the word. Now, is it somehow less effective, or am I now not operating under the tenets of my faith or under what God would call me to do because there are both men and women gathered to hear the gospel? Like, it's just really silly. And I personally think that it's a misinterpretation and application of the scripture.
Just speaking from a man's standpoint, this is my speculation because I have not talked to a lot of men that may have this type of thinking, but I know it's out there.
When they are.
I know it's out there. I may see it on social media, this, that, and the other circle. I know it comes out. Maybe they hiding behind it. They don't. I don't know. Whatever have you. But I think what some men may be believing is, or questioning, a woman's ability to lead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That it's the idea that there is a hierarchy. I'm gonna give you how men may be thinking about this.
Mm-hmm.
That there's a hierarchy, and that hierarchy kind of structure should not be broken.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And in some cases, when the line gets blurred in their minds, that it causes a change in the hierarchy of like, well, where things are at, right? Guys, we see things from the top down, and that structure is kind of very rigid.
Mm-hmm.
And it messes with our theology or our psychology or our emotional spirituality to say, okay, if she leads here, can she lead here?
Mm-hmm.
If she, and we have a question on here, we maybe jump to that. If she leads at the church, does she lead her house?
Mm-hmm.
That's a question a man may ask.
Mm-hmm.
Or where, what does that look like? Okay, she, does everything follow her shoulders?
Mm-hmm.
Because biblically, the God holds man responsible with what they're going to say for his house. Is not going to hold a woman responsible. And I would think they would be accurate in making that statement. So understand, okay, hold on, if that is the case, where does the buck stop when it comes to between that man and God? If he says, okay, I'm going to turn over all of my responsibility, she's going to lead, and is God going to still hold me accountable?
But I don't know that I would say that it's a complete surrender of all responsibilities. Like,
that's why
I think that leadership, one of the biggest portions of leadership is proper delegation. And so if you only have one leader who has a say, that's dictatorship. And they're the only person that has a say in anything. And I think that part of the challenge is that men, for whatever reason, be it ego, I think it's a systematic oppression of women, both in the church and in community. I remember a couple years, well, now a long time ago, when Hillary Clinton was running for office, and this is not political, but when Hillary Clinton was running for office, a lot of people were saying, like, blatantly, she can't lead because she's a woman. She can't do it. I remember there being jokes. Well, what if she's on her cycle? Then she's going to blow up places, like really silly things. So based on she wears pantsuits and, like super trivial things. And instead, so people were thrown off by the fact that she's a woman. But being able to lead in any space, obviously competence, and the ability to delegate, and even the ability to recognize what you don't do well. A good leader is not going to say, I'm going to do everything because I'm a man, or I can handle it all because I'm a woman. It's, you know what? I do this well. I don't do this well. Let me delegate this responsibility. Let's share this. Maybe there's something I need to learn. Maybe there's something I need to dig in deeper. And that doesn't have anything to do with gender bias. That has to do with competence and self-reflection. And so I think that when you start talking about leadership in the church or in the community or in the home, they all require the same amount of high level being able to look and say, okay, these are all the things that I'm responsible for. And the best way to be efficient is what? Fill in the blank. It doesn't mean the best way to be efficient is I do all of them. That would be poor leadership. Or the best way to be efficient is I'm going to hire all men, or I'm going to hire all women, or I'm going to hire all Black people or all white people. Like, at some point you have to say who's the best for this, and creating opportunities, because so often opportunities are not given to people that have the competence and the ability based on something like skin color or gender. And so you miss that. And so then you say, well, women are unable. Well, they just haven't had a seat at the table. They just haven't had the opportunity because you've had this door closed based on gender, based on genitalia, based on experiences with other guys. So it becomes this kind of boys club, and you're locking the door and holding in all the secrets. And so women have to kind of fight their way up. And so, of course, when you're holding all the secrets and you know how it's done, she's pushing against a system and having to learn it all on her own, and then sharing it with her community. So you might say, well, she doesn't know these things. No, of course she doesn't, because she's having to learn it on the job while you knew from the back door. So I think that that's part of what happens both in the home and in the workplace.
You said a lot of things in there. And I'm gonna go back early on when you mentioned about, when there's one person making a decision, it's a dictatorship. I think some people may think that, but we know from a biblical standpoint that should not be the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where one person making a decision, because ultimately that man should be receiving from God, so he should be under some authority, right? Mm-hmm. A man is not under any authority. That's different. We say we should separate the two, right? Mm-hmm. Just from conversation standpoint. The idea that is missed that I'm looking at is like it's the accountability piece,
mm-hmm.
right? And I think for some men, it's a little bit of nerve wreck. I'm taking the side of maybe some men that I haven't talked to. So I'm just trying to get in their headspace, maybe bring to light the conversation so it can be clear. The response, the accountability piece of what happens with that, right? If decisions are being made and the accountability piece, let's say they have a wife that she wants to make the decisions. Majority of the decisions on whatever, that accountability piece, who does it fall under?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a question maybe some men have. Maybe you guys have it. I don't know, right? Mm-hmm. For women that may think, hey, you know what? I want an equal seat at the table. I want to be able to make the decisions. To where's the accountability piece fall at for the household?
My perspective is I don't have any problem being back to back with you, that I have your back and you have my back. And I appreciate the things that I don't see you see. And I believe that you appreciate the things that you don't see, I see. And it takes a certain level of maturity to be married, because sometimes I won't see what you see, and I have to trust enough that you see what I don't, and that maybe this time, maybe he's right. I don't get it. I don't see it. And I've articulated it. Say, I don't know, but I'm going to let you have it. And we've gone back and forth and sat at the table and talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. And at some point, I have relinquished. And there have been times where you have not seen. And we've talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. And you have relinquished. But I do feel that is critical in a home, is to be able to say, hey, I'm willing to come behind my spouse and to step behind him. And there have been times that you've been like, I got your back. I'm willing to say, okay, Tristin, we gonna lean on what you understand, your insights, your understanding, your experience. And I think that when we come to the table, we come saying, this is the decision that we are making. And I think that that's important, that it's not ever, it's always Tristin's way because I'm strong, or it's always Michael's way because he's strong. We come to the table hand in hand and we say, we got each other and we are deciding to make this decision together. Even if it is, I'm deciding to trust you, I'm still making the decision with you. Or you're saying, hey, Tristin, I'm deciding that we're partners in this and I don't see it the way that you see it, but I'm also recognizing that God speaks to you too, and you have your own devotional and you have your own prayer life and whatever that looks like. And I'm saying, we're going to go into this together period. So it's never for me, well, it's just, you got it then. It's what you want. It's not that. It's like, okay, we are deciding that we are going to go this direction. That's my thoughts.
No, that's good. That's good. We got a lot more to talk about. So maybe we do a part 2. We didn't even get through halfway what we were going to do. So don't be surprised as a part 2 to this. But good. Any closing thoughts you want to give?
No, I definitely want to hear from you all on this, even if you disagree with me or Michael. I appreciate your insights. So thank you so much for joining us today. Of course, check out us on any of our social handles. And as we said, also look at our website, fusedmarriages.com, for more content and resources. Because you know what? Let's talk about it.